Hi, Leslie. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, Ethan. Thanks for the invite. Yeah, very well. I think we both got sunny days at this moment in time.
Yeah, it is warm today, so hopefully it stays that way.
Yeah, hopefully.
But you best known for being the Beatles' hairdresser. We'll go right back to the start, really. How did you
Yep.
first get into hairdressing?
I got into hairdressing by complete fluke, to be honest with you. I know you must be a lead supporter, I'd imagine, wearing your
Yeah,
white
yeah.
t-shirts and everything there. Yeah, I wanted to be a footballer, and like everyone else, didn't quite have I didn't quite have it actually. So a good friend of mine, I left, when we were 15, I didn't really want to start studying. And a friend of mine, really good friend of mine, went into hairdressing, ladies hairdressing, which I thought was a strange situation to go into until I realized, he happened to be my best friend. And he just said, Leslie, it's fantastic. I said, how's work? And he says, great. You just go to work every day and all these lovely women come into the shop. So it really was as basic as that. And I went to pick my mum up from the hairdressing salon around the corner where I used to live. And I realized that he was right because there was one guy who owned the salon with three other lady assistant stylists and a shop full of women. So I decided I thought, that's not a bad idea, quite nice. So I joined Vidal Sassoon. I had no idea how to hold coma scissors, but I managed to do it and went up to London and met Sassoon and stayed there for 3 years and learnt my apprenticeship there, which is how I managed to hold a coma scissors and meet people that you wouldn't sort of expect every day. Famous people, see people on Cathy McGowan that used to be on Top of the Pops and introducing Lulu and Shirley Bassey and these famous names that you're either washing their hair or you can end up doing their hair. So that's how I got into hairdressing.
Well, you mentioned Vidal Sassoon there. He was like your mentor, really. What was he like?
Well, he was brilliant. He was the sort of cutting edge of fashion. He was revolutionary. It's a little bit like Dylan going electric. He just, he had his scissors and he went electric and he was a very smart man. He's from the same part of London as I was. I was born in the East End of London, both sort of roots of being a Cockney, but he had the most incredible sort of accent. Everything was sort of perfect and the way he spoke and he thought about every word. Yeah, I found out he had elocution lessons, but he was always very smart. He danced around when he had a client on the chair. He used to dance around like a ballerina. He's like Rudolph Nureyev. He just like a ballet dancer, ballet hairdresser. Fantastic to watch. And if you were lucky enough during your apprenticeship, you would end up doing your sort of last 3 months with him. And then that would sort of be the icing on the cake, which meant that if you were good enough to work for him, you'd stay in the salon. Otherwise, you would go off with a Vidal Sassoon certificate and say you're Sassoon trained. So I was lucky enough to do that. And with that, you met a lot of famous people that you sort of only see in the newspapers or on the TV. So yeah, he was terrific. Very good mentor. Excellent.
Well, as you say, a lot of famous people came into his salon. Who was your favourite that you did cut the hair?
I started, it was ladies hairdressing. Okay. So we started off. So there's lots of interesting things that happen being a ladies hairdresser. It's like confessions of a lady hairdresser. And, lots of stories. But I eventually, you start off washing hair and then you end up being a stylist. And I started cutting people like I was helping out a little bit with Dusty Springfield, although the other guy was doing her hair. When they were busy, they used to sort of if they knew that you washed their hair or something, then they knew you were a stylist. Oh, hold on, it's Leslie busy or whatever. So she was really interesting to talk to, and her hairstyles. Well, you can see, well, the fashion with Amy Winehouse that changed because of that. I used to enjoy cutting sort of normal people, office girls. What I liked was they used to save up their money. And, it was a big deal to come into Sassoon's in Bond Street. Eventually, we moved over to Grosvenor House. they were great to talk. They're down to earth, normal people saved up for have a haircut and to go out looking good. And Vidal's motto, his motto, which he taught all of us, was if you don't look good, we don't look good. So it was something to sort of look up to, and for somebody to say that, and we made sure everybody looked good. Yeah.
Do you know, like, this high etiquette they had and these high standards? Did this, like, roll on into your life and your everyday life having these high standards?
Yeah, he did. His high standards. He used to say to us, a lot of guys that I worked for, who when I used to wash hair and being a junior, that disrespected the client. Okay, Vidal always said, remember, it doesn't matter how friendly you get with the client, you can have a good laugh with her, whatever. Always remember, she's a paying client. Best to keep your mouth shut. Let the client talk, because we were in at 8 o'clock in the morning sometimes, doing hair. And women come in that time of the morning, probably rolled out of bed, no makeup, come in, and then about an hour and a half later, they're looking $1 million. They were going either to work, but sometimes they didn't want to talk. And that really did help me, because I knew some of the other guys there, stylists, who talked and did more than talking, and they ended up with no clients. So you had to be a bit careful. So that was one of the really good things he told me. Always respect, remember they're a client. And the second thing was, keep your mouth quiet, let the client talk, you talk to the client, still create your own personality, but do it. And that, for later on, for what I did, was very important, because it worked. It
Yeah.
worked regarding not opening my big mouth in situations that I saw that could have been newspaper worthy, So yeah.
So through Vidal Sassoon's, this is how you came to cut Jane Asher's hair that led to the Beatles. Can you give us a little story behind how all this came?
Yeah, certainly. So, Vidal's, as I said, don't ask too many questions. Now, I used to wash Jane Asher's hair, and the stylist used to do it. When I became a stylist, I started doing sort of you call yourself like a junior stylist or something. And she came in one day, and the guy that's supposed to do it is sort of Mr. Roger. Everyone was Mr. Vidal, Mr. Roger. I was Mr. Leslie, and he was the artistic director of Sassoon. He had one problem. He was very, very slow. So when I became a stylist, the receptionist came down and said, Leslie, can you do Miss Asher's hair? Because Roger can't do it. So I said, yeah, and she's getting back to what I was saying to you before, because I'd washed her hair before and blow dried it. It was just a natural progression for me to do it, except I got someone else to wash it. And I did that once, and I did it twice. And on the third occasion, the receptionist said, Miss Asher's very upset. Is very she's upset with Roger. He can't do her hair again. Can you do it? So yeah, no problem, no problem. And I did her hair, did it as normal, finished it, and she said, I thought it was awful. I showed her the back mirror, everything was fine, and she said, "What are you doing this afternoon?" And I was going to football, and she said. I said, "Why is that, Jane?" She said, "Great. Have you got time to cut my boyfriend's hair?" Now, all the time that Jane Asher came in, she's in the papers that she's, first of all, Paul McCartney's girlfriend, then she's his fiance. So you knew who Jane Asher was, besides her being a really talented actress, So you wouldn't say to her, "Oh, how's Paul?" Or what, you wouldn't mention it, So it was never said, until she said, "Have you got time to cut my boyfriend's hair?" Which I know who the boyfriend is. So, and I said, yeah, of course. And she said, okay. And she said, when are you available? I said, well, this afternoon. And she said, that's fine. See you then. I said, oh, by the way, Jane, I forgot to tell you, ask you, where do you live? And she went, oh. So she wrote down a piece of paper and said, number 7, Cavendish Avenue. I said, Jane, that's my surname. And she went, well, maybe it was meant to be. Really weird. Just to go a little bit weirder than that, move it on. about a year later, I was asked when I was at the Apple offices that John Lennon wanted to have his hair cut. Paul McCartney lives in town, St John's Wood, behind Lord's Cricket Ground, round the corner from Abbey Road. And the other three live down in Sunningdale, which lovely country houses, about 2 hours, an hour and a half, 2 hours to come up. And so I was asked to go down because John would want his haircut. And I said, fine. I said, where does he live? And he went, oh, he lives down in Weybridge, Cavendish Close. Weird or not weird?
It's crazy how life has these little moments that all happen.
Yeah, little moments of, yeah. So that's how I did it. That's why I went around that afternoon.
So you went round to cut his hair. As you say in your book here that I've got, which is a brilliant read, you mentioned that you were a bit like a fanboy when you first went round, wasn't you?
Yeah, I was a groupie. I was a Beatles fan. My sister's got pictures of Paul McCartney all around the bedroom wall. Here I am. Actually, I went to football that afternoon. I didn't tell anybody what I was doing. I had my bag, I had a carpet bag with my blow dryer, comb and scissors, whatever. And I'm driving to St John's Wood. And I'm getting nervous a bit because, this is not a normal haircut. This is not someone coming into the salon at 3 o'clock and at 2:30, 2:45, I'm getting nervous because the client's going to walk in and he's going to sit down in front of a mirror. I'm going around to someone's house, right? I don't know how that works. And I get there and there were a few girls outside. Later, George Harrison wrote a song called Apple Scruffs. But, these girls were not the girls that would pull your hair out, tear your shirt apart. They were very respectable. So I understood Paul used to make sure, they used to stay all night, really late at night. They used to do it in shifts. And coffee used to go out and tea and everything there. So it was all very nice. So when I was pressing the doorbell, they said, oh, can you get me Paul's autograph? And I said, oh, no, nothing to do with me. I'm just going inside. Like I could have been a plumber, anybody. And bell answers, hi, I'm Leslie. Oh, Miss Ashes has told us that you're coming. Please come in. So I take a deep breath and say, right, Leslie, you're going around there as a hairdresser, right, to cut Paul's hair. You're not there as a groupie, right? You don't start, just gaga. I walked through, and the first thing I saw was a green Aston Martin. Never forget it. And I thought, oh my God. And he lives in this lovely, not ostentatious, but beautiful sort of Georgian house, detached house. And I thought, oh my God, this is when you make it in life, James Bond and Paul McCartney, Aston Martin. This is brilliant. This is it. And I walk up the stairs and I'm just gathering myself and sort of like, okay, deep breath, expecting the housekeeper to open the door, say, please come in, take a seat while Mr. McCartney will come and see you. So as I press the buzzer, Paul opens the door straight away. No housekeeper, nobody. And he went, hello, Leslie. He said, I've heard all about you from Jane. Would you please come in? Would you like a cup of tea? And I said, oh, yes, please. No sugar. Within 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I'm sitting in Paul McCartney's front room with a mad dog, old English sheepdog, running around, which was funny. Jane was away she was working down in Bristol. So Paul was there. And then the next thing he came in with some tea. And I'm just sitting there thinking, I can't believe it. I can't tell it. First of all, I couldn't tell anybody that. But on the other hand, no one would believe me, right? But, you had guitars by the fireplace. You had old cassettes sitting there. You had some albums there. You had the piano, psychedelic piano, in one corner. And the house was just a little bit sort of like a man's house. Although he had a housekeeper, I'm sure if Jane was there, it would be, absolutely perfect. But there was dog hair sat on the couch. I remember all this dog hair all over the place, and it was cool. It was really, really nice. And he was so down to earth. It made me relaxed.
Yeah.
The reason why that was, sorry, you can say.
Oh no, I was going to say did him like answering the door and everything being normal kind of put you at ease? That's what I was going to say.
He put me at ease totally, and it's all to do with Ethan. It's all to do with timing, you know. I went round there. It was September 1966. Okay. Um, the Beatles' last concert was in Candlestick Park in August. I think August, late 27th, 28th of August. So I've caught him like nearly 3 weeks after that concert when he's not a Beatle. If you can understand, they've been a Beatle, you know, from 62 to 66, wearing shirt and ties, making sure Brian Epstein made sure they looked absolutely immaculate. Hair was perfectly in place. And when I saw him, his hair was, you know, wasn't the typical Beatle type of look. He was unshaven, and he was in his jeans, and it was a t-shirt, and it was all very casual. So I just caught him at that moment in time where he could relax to be probably Paul McCartney without being a Beatle, because every day I was thinking about it. You know, every day when he woke up, the Beatles, all four of them, had to be the Beatles. So I was going to a press conference, recording, going on tour, and now he's got his own home. So it became very relaxing. Thing is that while I'm looking, you know, which I always do, I'm looking at his hair, right? And I'm thinking, how the hell does he want his hair? And I asked him gradually after our tea, and I'm now thinking, how do I go around these? How do I talk about where do we do your hair? And I said, oh, by the way, Paul, you know, how do you want your hair? And he said, oh, do it as you see it, which was brilliant. Do it as you see it. Yes, I certainly will, because that's, you know, that's the way my hair at the time, and people's hair was longer and not so looking Beatleish, you know. It was great. And I said, okay, great. I said, and where do we do this? He said, oh, upstairs in the bedroom. So I go upstairs to the bedroom, where there is an ensuite bedroom. And I've never seen an ensuite bedroom before. Honestly, never seen a bedroom with a beautiful, you know, with a nice bedroom, bathroom. And we sat down, and here's Paul McCartney, the most famous fellow in the world there. And he's sitting down in front of a little mirror. And I put a little towels around him, doing a little bit of hair. At Vidal's, we were taught, cut the hair dry, check it wet, and then after you've done it, you check it again, right? Never cut the hair wet, because you can, that's the way it is. There's a technical reason for that. So I cut his hair dry, and then I've got to wash it. So there was, you know, funny enough, I've got a glass of water, cheers. So I picked up the cup, which was by the side, filled it up, was pouring water on his head, and then doing it, shampooing it, and then doing it again. He did not bat an eyelid. It was nothing sort of, you know, put your head back and a beautiful hair wash. And he was so down to earth and made me feel very comfortable, you know, that he could go along with that. And that was the very first time I did it, that particular day. And when I left, there was always a lot of newspaper reporters, paparazzi, music people, sometimes outside. And it was my first time. I remember one of them came up to me and just said, "Is Paul okay? Any information?" They always had a few bob in their hands, you know, to give you. And I said, "No, nothing. I don't know nothing." Got in my car, went home, and went, "Yes, yes." I thought I would. That was a great moment, actually. Thinking you know, it was like a pinnacle. I've cut my hero's hair, and not, you know, musically, you know, not sporting wise. Yeah, and then it all snowballed from there until about 2 weeks later. I get another phone call, always from his road manager, Mal Evans or Neil Aspinall, they would ring, and said, "Paul wants you to go over." And I thought, that's fun. I just sort of cut his hair not 2 weeks ago. I don't know what the big deal is. But yeah, of course I'll go over there. Even exchanged phone numbers. You know,
Really?
even had his phone number in my book. And I remember going there, and it was much more relaxed this time, right? I know it was probably because he was going through a bit of a number. He was having a little problems with his girlfriend was away. I think there was a few issues brewing up within the Beatles hierarchy there. And he was at home and he was unshaven, more unshaven when I saw him before. He had a little moustache. Well, about a good 10-day moustache, good shadow over him. And I said to him, haven't seen while we're doing his hair again, so it wasn't cutting so much, it was just washing it and blow drying it. Uh, I said, I haven't seen Jane for a while. And he said, no, she's down in Bristol, she's filming. So I said, oh, well, now you're not working. Maybe you would like to, you go down there and watch her. He said, no, I can't do that because all they're going to talk about is the Beatles. You ask questions, and Jane's got her own thing. She's got a film she's being made. It's not fair on Jane. And as I'm still doing her hair, well, I suppose when she finishes that, you'll be able to go on holiday with her. And he said, no, I've got the same problem. They're following me. And for some mad reason, I had his hair, like sort of grabbed it there. And I just said, what a shame. I said, why don't you go in disguise? And it was just a throwaway line, a throwaway line. And he said to me, well, how? What do you mean, how? And as I had the hair like that, I just went, why don't I cut all your hair short? And as I said it, I thought it's such a stupid thing to say. You can't say that. And he said, go on, then do it. I said, serious? He said, yeah. So I cut his hair that short. When I finished, he didn't say anything. It wasn't like, oh my God, what's happening? Oh my God, The only thing I was worried about, we went down we went down again, had some tea and some extras, and I'm looking at his hair there, thinking, oh my God, what happens if Brian Epstein gets a phone call saying that they'll offer the Beatles $100 million for one concert, and he says yes, and there's McCartney with a skinhead. I didn't think it would. I was just madly. There was a mad little thought I had. Anyway, when I left, I thought to myself, "Oh my God, this is that's it now. Cut all his hair short." Next thing, 6 weeks goes by, and there's a big article in the newspaper that says Paul McCartney arrives back from Nairobi, from Kenya, on a safari with his girlfriend, fiancée Jane Asher, and his road manager Mal Evans. And when they got to the airport, that's they all knew, and the reporter was sort of saying, "Paul, you've gone away on holiday. Great. Are you getting married? Are you getting engaged? By the way, who cut your hair?" And then Mal Evans, bless her, said, "Oh, it's Barbara Leslie Cavendish." And that was it. That was it. That was like, fantastic, Mr. Evans. You did me a big favour there.
In your book, that moment where you cut his hair short, you says was the start of Sergeant Pepper's, and that theory does make sense when you read it.
Well, there's lots of things. There's journalists have written a few things. Let's put it this way: would he have gone on holiday as he was? I got no idea. So he goes in disguise. Right, so he's got short hair. He gets on the plane coming back, and Paul and Mal Evans passing the salt and pepper. So he's now there, he's come back, and that was the look for Sergeant Pepper. John had already had his hair cut for a film. So, yeah, it's a nice story. It was a Sergeant Pepper look, and it was where I came in. So when I start looking at Beatle photographs, what they look like, I always look at their hair. And I always see from the beginning of 1967 is when they started Sergeant Pepper. And that's also the time that I was down at the studio watching them record, which is one of the things I decided not to do. Again, Mr. Sassoon was in my ear mentally, was don't ask for an autograph, because I would imagine that every single person who meets him would. And the last thing to do, which everyone was going to ask me, don't keep their hair, right? That would have been a big thing, to take their hair, and then it would have been sold off and everything there. And I thought, if I just, you end up doing, you don't get, you get one shot, as Eminem said, you get one shot at something, and if you do it, it's not going to last forever, but don't blow it and don't make yourself cheap. So go along with it, keep quiet, and you never know what could come of it. And by doing that, it got me to not only cut the other three Beatles' hair and to go on tour with them on the film, the Magical Mystery Tour. But I remember saying to Paul, he once said to me, "Oh, have you been paid?" She never asked him for any money. And I said, well, I didn't want to tell him I would have done it for nothing. And he said, Neil asked Neil to do it. Just go up there and just book in. So, which I did. And I said, Paul, and after a while, he knew I wasn't asking for his autograph. I wasn't doing anything sort of, I certain things I saw him, but situations he was in at home. I kept quiet. I could have easily just said he was getting pissed or getting stoned or whatever. I didn't do that at all. And I said, Paul, is there any chance that I can watch you record? That's all I wanted to do. And he said, yeah, I'll arrange it. And he did. So, that was it. That was it. So the Beatles used to record late at night, so from about 9 o'clock onwards till 7 in the morning. So that was my winning. That was my little bit I wanted.
What was that like the first time I went into the studio with them?
Well, I went. They were there already. Very strange. I was there the other day. Actually, it's funny. By the gates at Abbey Road at night, it was dark, obviously, and there was a doorman there. And I knew they'd come about 9 o'clock. And I get to the doorman, the guy at the gate, not the doorman, gate man, said, oh, by the way, I said, hi, I said, I've been invited to come along and watch recording the Beatles. Oh, yeah, mate. He said, oh, yeah, I've heard that one before. I said, no, I really have. No. And I said, oh, this guy's never going to let me in. I said, look, if you go inside or get someone to see Mal Evans, if you tell Mal Evans that Leslie Cavendish is outside, hopefully you'll see that I have an invite. And waited about 10 minutes or whatever. And he came back and said, okay, mate, in you go. And I didn't even know there was two studios, Studio 1, Studio 2. So I got upstairs to someone took me up there. There was one other person up there. And I could see them overlooking, downstairs in the booths, the Ringo on the drums, and there was Paul and John in some booths there. They were talking, and George was doing his bit there. And what was interesting, there was George Martin and the sound engineer, Jeff Emmerich, was up there. I've never been, it's like being in a cockpit, if you're not in that way, okay, it's like a cockpit. You've got all these controls there and all this. And they were talking and all through echoing through the microphone, and George Martin, they obviously been doing something. So they knew, I just caught what was going on. And he said, I remember Paul's, or it could have been John, what happens if we make that a bit louder there? And it's a bit like the pilot, Jeff Emmerich. He's the one he's in charge. The next thing, Paul comes up and comes in, has a chat with George Martin. And then while the others down there, and the music was there, he starts twiddling the knobs. That's like interfering with the pilot, So I remember seeing this guy thinking, "Get off! This is my gig." So he went, "No, if you do that," and he went, and it was playing around the sounds. It was fascinating, and what was fascinating about it, I think that was probably, I didn't know at the time, that's how artists started producing, because they came up, because they were always told what to do, but you've got all these knobs there, and you make it high, low, whatever, you can do whatever you want. And that was interesting to see that. That was really interesting.
When you were in the studio with them over the years, what was your favourite moment that sticks with you?
Well, there's a couple of moments that I saw that I kept quiet about. I wrote it in my book, so it's no big deal. But I didn't realise at the time that Paul was a fantastic drummer. He plays. He's a really good drummer. And I remember on an occasion being there, and I don't think John was there, but obviously Ringo and Paul were talking about the beat, whatever was going on. And I remember Paul saying, or shouting across, "Not like that." And then Ringo did it. He said, no, no, not like that. And next thing I knew, he ran over. He went over to the drum kit, and there was another guy up there as well. This was another occasion. And he grabbed the drumsticks out of Ringo's hand and said, no, no, like this. Now, that could not have been the first time he's done that, because, Paul plays drums, and I'm sure that's how it works. But it didn't look good in front of me and this other guy. Because I went, oh my, I said to the guy, he just whipped his bloody drumsticks out of his hand. And the next thing we were told, get no effing, clear the deck, he said up there. So I was told politely to leave right, with this other guy. That could have been a little story for some, newspaper. Keep quiet. And the other one was they did have a sort of an unwritten rule that the wives or girlfriends wouldn't be at the studio. And I remember a situation, wasn't at Abbey Road or EMI at the time even, at Trident Studios in London, which is a fantastic studio. Everyone sort of, they did Hey Jude there and everything. But I remember going there late at night and sitting in the corner, there was Yoko and John. She was stroking his hair. And again, Paul said to John, what do you think? Or something, And he just turned around to Yoko and went, what do you think? I thought, oh, blimey, that's strange. And nothing was done. I thought, whoa, yeah, wonder how he thinks about that. Here he is, like talking to his mate all these years, writing together, and he asks his girlfriend what she thinks. That was interesting. These were little moments I kept quiet and was interesting to see. But my favourite little moments were Paul sitting at the piano late at night at Trident, and me saying to him, "Have you got anything written or anything?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "What do you think of this?" Not me, but what do you think of this? Oh yeah, I've got this. He went, "Oobla-dee, oobla-da, da-da-da-da, la 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 la." Now I thought that was just him mucking about on the piano, making a little ditty. So it didn't seem Beatlish. It was just a oobla-dee. I didn't realise that until that came out on the album. And then in Studio 2 once I went in and I saw Paul conducting a orchestra, not knowing what that was, but there were strings and he's talking to the conductor about certain things. And I was there for about a couple of hours in between. They were doing lots of things. Didn't realise that was the practicing for a day in the life, which was absolutely amazing. And it wasn't until I heard the albums that I went, oh my God, that was that, and that was that. Because at the time you don't know it was called Day in the Life. You don't know what Oobla-Dee. You don't even know what it is, until. So yeah, lots of favourite moments like that. I again kept quiet. There was an old saying that I didn't want to cut a single, I wanted to cut an album for myself.
There's some brilliant memories there. Like people would pay loads of money to experience something like that. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it was good. I've got to say, all of them as well. I was, watching them on all different occasions, separately as well. I was down at the Twickenham Studios watching Ringo doing his hair for the Magic Christian, and he's only appearing with my bloody pin-up of all times with Rachel Welsh, So, and then Peter Sellers was in the movie as well. So, and I've got to say that, even Ringo, and I say even Ringo because they never treated you, how can I say it? I wasn't really staff, I was there, but they treated you with respect, for me. That's all I can say, and that goes down to John and George and Paul. It was never sort of, I remember once, I'll never forget this, when I started hairdressing, my mum's favourite person is Shirley Bassey. And I said, Mum, the first time, Mum, I was 15, and I said, oh, Mum, you never guess who came in today. And she said, who? I said, Shirley Bassey. I said, oh, my God, God. And then when she came in again once, she clicked her fingers to some of them. I thought, how bloody rude. And she went, come on, do that. So I didn't want to spoil it for my mum, but getting back to what I'm saying, there are certain people, they were never like that, never like that. May have done to other people, there are people who've always got stories about certain things and situations, but I can't say, I can't say really that thing bad, in my time with them, which was very personal. It was a personal time, so it was good.
You got
Yeah.
in the papers when you shaved Paula's skinhead, like we've mentioned. What was it like being in this circle and in this like media frenzy when it's absolutely crazy with the Beatles? Like anything could make it in the papers with them.
Yeah, again, work. I lived in town, and I lived in Chelsea. There was a lot happening around there. Really, by what it did for me cutting the Beatles' hair was get me some really good clients, and I moved away from ladies' hair. 90% of the time was men now. And I'm getting introduced, the Bee Gees came in. Barry Gibb used to go around the Barry's house a lot. Robin used to go around the house. Not only just cut the hair, to sit there and, as I said to you, I'm a groupie. I sit there and they'd be playing guitars. Barry used to live in Eaton Square, and I lived down the end of the King's Road. And I used to go around there. We both had one thing in common. We both had dogs. If you look at my book, you'll see it's dedicated to my rock and roll spaniel, Ernie. And Barry had a dog called Barnaby. If you're a Bee Gees fan, there's a song called First of May, which is Barnaby's birthday. But I used to go around there. My dog used to play with Barnaby. I went round there a few times, always summer there. And there was Richie Havens, who I've met at Apple. And they're sitting there playing acoustic guitar, and I'm sitting there with my own little concert. I've got my own little concert. So little things like that were going on. They were the pluses. They were the pluses of everything. I never took anyone around with me, obviously. But and I started people like Dave Clark 5. They were regulars, and Keith Moon became a regular, which was nice. So all these things that sort of were bonuses. Out of that, I had my own life with my mates, going to football, and it was nothing sort of anything like that. But you did get, I must say, I did get a few good invites to parties and places that wouldn't have normally have happened. So yeah, it was all part of that scene at the time. It was nice.
It was a big scene in London in the 60s, and you've got your job with Vidal Sassoon and Paul McCartney. You've got all this going on, but you did actually leave and went to Israel when the war was happening. And
Yeah, I did. It was a weird situation. I was, what's exactly how old I was. I was 20 years old. I'm doing the Beatles' hair. I suddenly I picked up the newspapers, and although I come from I'm proud to be Jewish, I don't come from a very religious family at all, actually. Not at all. Just proud to be Jewish. My dad was proud of it, and we kept it very even. And I remember seeing in the newspaper, Daily Express, that arrows from Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, all sort of, and for some reason I just felt threatened. I did. I suddenly felt threatened. And a few of my friends also thought, maybe we'll go there. They were looking for volunteers. And I went and asked Vidal, because I've got a great job. I've got the Beatles I'm doing, and things are going really well for me. And I said, Mr. Vidal, I said, look, for some reason, I want to volunteer to go out there and see if I can help on the kibbutzes there and whatever. Do you mind? And he said, no. I forgot that Vidal was one of the very first people in 1948 to go, and he started when the IDF started. And so he knew exactly how I felt. And I did say to him, I said, can I have my job back when I come back? And he said, yep, no problem. So I went out there for 3 months, had a fantastic time there, believe it or not. It was right on the border of the Golden Heights. And one of my jobs, although we start off, I used to get up, to get up 2 o'clock in the morning, get the oranges and everything ready for market. Eventually, you work all that, you do the washing up, and I ended up being the kibbutz hairdresser. And brilliant. I used to cut the hair by the swimming pool, let it dry in the sun. Oh no, just cut the hair dry. They used to jump in the swimming pool. I'd come out again. I'd finish it, and it would dry in the sun. And I remember writing to Vidal saying, everything's going all right here, and maybe you should open a salon up here by the Golden Heights. Where else is soon at the Golden Heights? Yeah, I did that for 3 months and came back, which was very, very interesting, because how do I let Paul McCartney, basically he's my link, the whole thing, how do I get him to know that I'm back? Maybe 3 months gone by, they've got other people to do their hair. Who knows what goes on? Maybe that was it then. And I remember coming back, and I actually let Mal Evans or Neil Aspinall knew that I said I was back. And I get a phone call about 2-3 weeks later, and they said, would you like to, we're doing a film called, we don't really know, something like, we're going to go on a coach, going to go down to the West Country. It's a bit sort of, we're going to pick John, Ringo and George up down the country. We've got sort of a little script, and we've got majority on this coach with some fan club members, some actors. Would you like to come along and be a passenger? Bloody hell. Yeah. Now, what I was excited about was I never went on the road with the Beatles, because that was all done before I came in town. But to actually see them work together was something that would have been was very interesting to see how does this partner, how does it work? So yeah, so that was when there was the bus came along with a Magical Mystery Tour on it. I was told to get there at it's quite interesting. I just come back from Israel. The hairdresser that I took, who was Jane Asher's hairdresser, who then put me on to Paul McCartney, really had it in for me, because he should have been Paul McCartney's hairdresser, but because he didn't do Jane's hair that time, eventually I did it. I called him the Pete Best of hairdressing, poor guy, great hairdresser, but he missed out. So he didn't like me. And then I felt I couldn't say to him, Mr. Roger, I've been invited to go to the Beatles, to go down to the countryside. He would have said no. He would have definitely said no. So I got my mum to ring up to say that I'm not very well. I said, Mum, just tell him I'm not very well. We'll leave it at that. Okay. So I meet Paul at a place called Allsop Place, which is very near Madame Tussauds, about 8 o'clock in the morning, 8:30 in the morning. He's sitting on the floor. An hour goes by. And the weirdest thing is he's sitting on the pavement. There's a famous picture of him sitting next to a guy called Ivor Cutler, it's Mr. Ivor Cutler, yes. And there were all these office girls going to work at 8:30 in the morning. And then you think about it, right? They're walking by, and there's Paul McCartney sitting on the floor talking, and they took a double look. Oh my God, that's Paul McCartney. It was funny to watch it. And well, that went okay. And then they made a phone call, and suddenly the coach hasn't been finished yet, painted. So he said, we got up. I was standing in front of him with a guy called Daniel, who was the photographer for the film. And he said, fancy a cup of tea, Leslie? Now, this is all about being in the right place. For some reason, do you want a cup of tea, Leslie? I said, yeah. So we go across the road to the Transport Cafe, where all the people from the night shift have been sitting there. We walk in there, and can you imagine Paul McCartney going into the canteen? And there's a picture of me and Paul having a cup of tea. Okay. I didn't know there was a picture being taken. Then we come out, a policeman comes along, so the pictures are taken. Okay. The following day, we get on the coach. The following day, I ring my mum up. Now, this time we've stopped down in, is it Devon, or on the way down to Devon? And I rang my mum. I said, Mum, did you ring up Vidal's and tell them that I'm no, I'm not well. She went, yes, they did. I did tell them, but they came back and said, if you don't get back now, you're going to get the sack. So I said, well, how do they know? They said, your picture's all over the Daily Express with Paul McCartney, having a cup of tea with him in a canteen and talking to a policeman. And I went, oh my God. And I've still got them here. And I thought, well, I'm just not going to go back. So I just stayed there. And it was a most fantastic eye-opener to watch them work together. Although at the time, it was only 3 weeks after Brian Epstein died. So that was a weird thing to do. Paul's always been asked, why did they not postpone it? And he said, well, Brian would have said the show would have gone on. And I think he would have. He did, so it was interesting to watch them, how they worked.
What was that week like then? Did you enjoy it?
Say that again?
Did you enjoy that week then on the Magical?
Oh, it was brilliant. It was brilliant because, what I saw was banter. Now, I lived my life with banter and jokes, and with all my mates, we have a good laugh. We're serious, but we could have a bit of banter in life. And I saw that combination there at work between them all. Not just with Paul and John, with John and George or Ringo or something. Ringo, if you know the film, sits in the front the whole time with his Aunt Jess, and they're screaming and shouting the whole time. So he was also being filmed a lot. I was in charge of a little girl called Little Nikki, a girl called Nikki Hale. She's the one when John Lennon sings "I Am the Warmest," if you listen to it, it says a little girl in the middle of it goes, "Oh no, you're not," and John Lennon goes, "Oh yes, I am," and she went, "Oh no, you're not," and he says, "Oh yes, I am." It's actually listen to the Magical Mystery Tour, "I'm the Warmest." So she's a little girl, 5 years old, and her mother was a client of mine, and I didn't know that they were coming on the coach. So I was put in charge of little Nikki. And if you look at the Magic Mystery Tour, I used to sit on my knee, and John Lennon, he had a hat with a feather, and George was next to him, and often during the journey, he'd he would fall asleep. And while he was doing that, she used to pull the feather out of his hat, poke him with it. And he did it right a few times. And he used to say, "Leslie, look after that girl. Just look after her." Move it on 60 years later, 55 years later, I get invited to do a talk at the Beatles convention in Chicago. And she was invited, Nikki Hale, who's now in her late 50s, early 60s. And we sat on the stage and we reminisced that same story I told you. And she was with him the whole time. It was quite incredible. And I'm still in touch with her. Yeah, little acorn into a lovely oak tree. Beautiful. Yes, still in touch with her. So yeah, it was really good, and also to watch how they perceived to be when they became into the public, when they got off the coach. They weren't, as I say, the screaming girls, and those girls are grown into be mums now. It's still only 1967, but it just, it was away from those high days of Shea Stadium and screaming at 63, 64, 65. They were also pleasant, all signing autographs, smiling, doing everything that you thought that good boys should do. And, I'm sure there was reasons why I guess I was sod this, that, I don't want to be this person. But yeah, so it was good to watch that. It was good to watch them have a good laugh. Had some fun down there as well, There's Spencer Davis, the guy, great song, "Keep on Running," fabulous song. He was down there. He's obviously friendly with Paul, and his uncle had a pub in Twyford down there. He'd obviously said to Paul somewhere along the line, "If you finished early or finish whatever, come down to the pub, let us know." Again, 8 o'clock-ish, 9 o'clock, Paul, Ringo, myself, and another lady who I've just forgotten her name, but she was a journalist as well, and was friendly with her down there. We were talking. The four of us went to the pub. If you think about it, right, so it's 9:30. There all these Cornishmen are drinking away there, and who pops through the door? Paul McCartney, and they have a piano there. And he just sits down at the piano. Give us the Paul, give us a Beatles song. Come on, sing. She loves you, Paul. And he didn't. He just sat down. And he was singing "Knees Up, Mother Brown." Real pub songs. There was a lady called Mrs. Mills. You will remember her. But Mrs. all these old pub songs. And there was uh, a one-string violin hanging on the wall that Ringo took down, and he was plucking away until he cut his thumb. And you see, these are all things that happen down there. And, these are stories I wrote in my book. But, I know I'm not making it up because it's the people that were down there at the time, these stories have been told. It's just so, these things happen. And I just happened to be there when all these things happen. So, I could say that whole week down there was terrific. Really good fun. There was, one of the guys, John Kelly, the photographer that took the photos. He was a good friend of mine. I shared a room with him down there, and he had access to the Beatles. He could literally go in and take pictures of the Beatles anywhere. So I used to follow him around. I told him I'm a groupie. So I'd go here, then I would go in there and blow dry their hair, whatever. It was all very loose. There was this tight little circle controlled by Mal Evans and Neil Aspinall. They were the barbed wire around them. And they knew who to let in, not to let in, and that's the way it was. And I never, I was there for that moment without getting on their nerves or being sort of pushy.
You
Yeah.
mentioned there it was only a few weeks after Brian Epstein died that they went and did the Magical History tour, and John and George weren't really sure on it. It's like to do it that quick, were they? Did you see cracks starting to show at that point within the band?
Probably without knowing it. Paul was directing the whole thing. Paul is the conductor of the Beatles, like it or not. I mean, it's so blooming obvious. Paul is 3 minutes. You can walk it in 4 minutes to Paul's house to Abbey Road, right? So if you're writing a song and you wake up in the middle of the night and you think to yourself, "Oh, it's not beyond imagination that you just get up, go to the studio, is it?" But if you are the other three living down 2 hours away, right? It's not. So you can see why Paul took control of the Beatles, because he was on top of it. So he took control of what was going on the bus, where Paul and John and George. So Ringo had a major part. He had the star part of the film, so he was occupied the whole time. And John and George were there for the ride. And I felt that they, on another day, in another situation, whatever, they may not have done it, but it was too raw, and it was the show must go on. And it wasn't until later on that they did go their own ways. But so was there cracks? When they went in the studio, there wasn't. There was just the normal marital argument, just, which we all relate. Any relationship is bound to have something like that.
Yeah.
It may have been the start. It may have been the start because they had time to think, right? They weren't being told every day in the studio doing a press show. We've got to fly to here. We've got to fly there. Everything was regimented. Everything was done exactly. Because they had so much time on their hands, and it was their own time, gives you time to think. And there's George. What's he thinking about? I'd like to write some songs and have an album made. And John is having, going through a crisis with his love life. And who am I? And what's he doing? And so, yeah, there probably was the start of it, but it didn't show then. I must admit, it didn't show then. But I could see that they let Paul get on with it. That was interesting. Just let him get on with it.
What was it like when you officially became their hairdresser, like at Apple, and you had your salon at Kings Road and stuff?
Yeah, so that was great. Now, again, my girlfriend at the time, this girl called Chris O'Dell. Chris O'Dell Actually, has got a film coming out of her soon. But she was George Harrison's PA, and we lived together. We were boyfriend and girlfriend. And so if she got invited somewhere, she would take me. If I got invited somewhere, I would take her. There was so it'd be difficult for me to ride around to Paul's house, maybe for a dinner or whatever, for me to take someone who doesn't know that situation. So we're very lucky because there was, we were fine together. We were comfortable. She was comfortable. I was comfortable. Um, she was there. Peter Asher was a great help to me, being James' brother. He was the A&R guy there. And the one I really got to also, besides Mel Evans thanking him for giving my name, was Derek Taylor, the press officer. And Derek Taylor, he really was like the fifth Beatle in that respect. You couldn't get a interview, you couldn't get near a Beatle without going through him. So again, just going back a little bit, Beatles were told to invest their money in property, and they decided to go into clothing. They opened a shop up at Baker Street, and then when that opened up, I was asked if would I mind? Of course I'm going to mind. Would you mind if we want to open a hairdresser salon for you, and we're going to have it with clothes there. So the clothes shop will be upstairs, and the salon will be downstairs. Is that okay? Yeah, yes. I think that'll be okay. It's in the King's Road. Yes, and I live right there. Yes, it's all jigsaws all fitting together. So I used to be at the salon, and if anything happened, Chris or Derek would ring up and say, "Leslie, can you come over?" It was like a second hairdressing salon for me. But I used to go over, and it was always to be cut someone's hair. No other reason I'd be going there. And I remember Peter Asher said to me once that I've got an artist we've just recorded, and he's got an album coming out in the next few weeks. Can you just cut his hair? So I saw this guy up there. He had hair down to his shoulders. Very stone-looking guy, but nice American. Everything was man. You could hardly. He was like this. It was, and I said, "Oh, you've just got an album coming out, music." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Who was on it?" He said, "Oh, Eric Clapton. Ringo was on drums." I'm thinking, blimey, this is a good little backing band he's got here. And I said, "Oh, when is that? What's your name?" So just in case. He said, "Oh, James Taylor." Sweet Baby James they were doing. And then you get lots of other, remember a guy called Tony Ashton from Tony Ashton, Gardner and Dyke, really good. And then you get just people. And so that it was like amazing. One of the things is that when I wrote my book, as I said, I didn't open my mouth for a long time. I can prove a lot of these stories that happen. Why? Sitting there one day with Derek up in the office, press office, and all these sacks were all around the press office room. I mean, it's like Father Christmas time, just stacks and stacks and stacks. I said, "Derek," I said, "what's all this?" He said, "Oh, these are the Beatles press cuttings that we get delivered every day from whatever the name is around the world." And I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Who does that then? How do you do that?" He said, "It's a company called Associated Press, and they just send everything off." And I said, "That's brilliant." I said, "Can you put my name down?" He said, "Yeah, okay." So he put my name down, and I started getting all these press cuttings coming through from Sweden, from Japan, you name it, wherever my name was mentioned, which I didn't even know it was mentioned anywhere. So I've got a scrapbook. I put all them in. So eventually, when I wrote my book and stories that I'm telling you now, when I sat and sort of analysed it right from the very beginning, I used to think, "Well, I remember that happening." But you look at my book, I'm like, for instance, cutting Paul McCartney's hair off. Okay. Am I making that up? No, I've got big pictures. Leslie, the barber who made Paul a skinhead. Big stories with my name. So stories like that. The big story, I remember being with Derek there one day, and when the Beatles used to come into the office, it would be sort of, when Paul came in, it was always being thumbs up. And it wasn't like, two receptionists, one person there. So it was like being at school, really, And and all was relaxed. And Ringo would come in, peace and love, man. George would come just floating in, fine. But when John came in, it was like the headmaster. Sit up straight. You never know what mood he could be in, right? So I'm upstairs next to Derek, and he looks at Derek and goes, "What's going on, Derek?" And he said, "Well, you got this, and you got an interview there." And he said, "Okay." And without looking at me, but looking at Derek, he went, "Who's he?" He said, "Oh, he cuts Paul's hair." He said, "Tell him to come in and cut mine." Not, "Will you come and cut mine?" He just said, "Tell him to come and cut mine." So he goes off. Really weird, this was. And Derek said to me, "John wants you to go and cut his hair." I said, "But he's doing an interview." He said, "Go and cut his hair. He wants you to do his hair." So I go into this room, big room there. And he's sitting on this chair, and there's an office desk there. And his hair is quite long, it's about there. He's doing, I thought he was doing an interview, which I think it had to be something to do with music. They're going to be the brains of Britain to know they're going to ask him about music. And there's every time this person asked a question, he kept moving his head. So I got his hair at the back, and he kept moving his head. And he said, "I don't understand. I don't understand. Explain." He's moving his head around, and I'm following around the back of the chair, just holding his head. You would think a normal person, like, "All right, Leslie, go away." Or, he was oblivious. So I'm thinking, what's going on here? And I looked at it, it was a little lady, Oriental lady, all in black, and it was Yoko Ono. I didn't know it was Yoko Ono, but it was Yoko Ono. Things like that. There was an occasion where there was a lady called, I remember her name now, Caroline Boucher. Caroline Boucher was the main music writer for Disc and Echo magazine. Big melody maker, and you had Disc. And she took me out. She was a client. She said, "Would you come and come out for lunch? Can I talk to you about the Beatles?" "Oh, really? I thought you were talking about football." But she said, "Oh," she said, "right, could you just tell me the texture of what's Paul's hair like?" I said, "Paul's got fantastic hair. You can maneuver it around and everything." Yeah. "And George has got long locks, and that is dead easy to cut. And you can, doing all this sort of how his hair would work." "And Ringo?" I said, "Ringo's really got great hair." I said, "Top of that, his wife's a hairdresser, Maureen. So it's great and really good." "And John's?" I said, "Yeah, that's okay. Mr. Big Shot here thinks he's Mr. Streetwise. Didn't realize that journalists want a story." And she said, "What, his hair's only okay?" So I said, "Well, yeah." She said, "Well, not as thick as the other three." So I said, "No, it's not as thick as the other three, but his hair's okay. So it's not great, is it?" So I said, "I didn't say it was great. I said, it's okay." "Okay." She said, "Just imagine, right? Just imagine that maybe in 30 years' time, do you think he would be the first Beatle to lose his hair or go bald?" I said, "Well, I don't think so." Well, she said, "Well, it does make sense, doesn't it? It makes sense that if his hair is not as thick as the others, he would go bald like an idiot." I said, "Well, possibly." Well, that was probably the last all she wanted to hear. And with that, we carried on talking, and we carried on talking about absolute nothing. Right? She said, "Thank you very much for the interview. Thank you, Leslie." So I said, "Oh, see you next week, for your haircut or hair, whatever you do." On the Thursday, Derek Taylor rings me, 8 o'clock at night. Now, Derek does not ring anyone 8 o'clock at night unless there's a problem, I'm sure. I'm sure it was something that could have waited till the morning if it was Derek ringing me. 8 o'clock in the morning, he's there that night. He says to me, "Leslie," he said, "what have you said?" I said, "Said what, Derek?" He said, "It's in the newspapers and it's on the radio being published that John Lennon's going bald." And I said, No, I don't know what you're talking about." He said, "Did you give an interview for Disc and said that John Lennon's going bald?" I said, "Well, I did, but I didn't say that." "Well, you better sort it out because that's the headlines." So wake up in the morning. I'm now thinking all night long, I can't believe this. And I could hear it. It was on the radio. Get your Disc magazine. John Lennon's going bald," said the Beatles hairdresser, all that rubbish. So I go at 1 in the morning, and the salon is across the road from where I am. I go and collect the newspaper, early morning, and there it is, right on the front page. Beatles Hairdresser said John Lennon's going bald. I open up the page, whole big page of all four Beatles, and everyone's what I say about John, what I say about Paul, George, and Ringo, and John. Now, I know that John Lennon's going to call me. It's obvious, isn't it? He's got to call me because he's going bald. So his hairdresser says, and why haven't I told him before I went to the press? So I'm down there, I'm dreading it, and the phone rings, and I know it's Lennon. Yes, literally, I'm no good at Liverpool accent, but he just said, "Hello, Leslie." And I went, "John," I said, "I'm so sorry." I said, I don't like, I'm groveling. "John," I said, I didn't say this. I didn't mean to say this. I said, but she took me out of context. And he turned around, as I said that, he turned around and said, "Don't effing well tell me about being taken out of context. I was saying, I was doing an interview and I said, we're bigger than effing Jesus Christ. And look what happened to me." And I went, "Oh, well, yeah." He said, "So I know what it's like being taken out of context. So I still don't quite know what he's going to say to me." And he said, "So don't worry about it." I went, "Oh my God, I don't believe that." He said, "Don't worry about it." So I went, and then suddenly he said to me, "I need to know one thing. Am I really going effing bald?" I said, "No." And I said, "Well, come over I had to go over to Savile and make sure." And I told him at the time, I said, because his hair was he was letting it just grow. And if you don't just even trim the ends off to make it a little bit thicker and let it go spiky, it would just drop off. It looked horrible. And I always used to say that to him, but he didn't care. It didn't really matter. And yeah, we had a good laugh about it. So that was another thing about how people think about John Lennon. Say he could be horrible, I was told, he really could be. But on that one occasion, so anyone else says to me about something, I've seen him down working on the Magical Mystery Tour. He did that, imagine your hairdresser telling a pop star you're going bald, and he was very cool about it. Very cool. So there were lots of little things that went on.
Obviously, there's been a lot of unhinged fans in the Beatles story, but did you see that firsthand?
No, I didn't see that first time, but Chris O'Dell, my girlfriend, did. Basically, what happened was, and I always remember this, when you go on holiday, you see people, you have a drink with them every night, and then they say, "Where do you live?" And you say, "Well, I live in London." They say, "Oh, we're coming to London next month." "Oh, when you come to London, give us a call." No one ever does, but you're being polite, you do it. And George Harrison was in Haight Ashbury and on acid and stoned and met the Hells Angels through a guy called Ken Kesey, who wrote Once Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and people. And he sort of said, if you're coming to London ever, come by. And they took him literally, right? So when they arrived at the airport with 12 people, four Harley Davidsons, the first thing that happened was they did, when they got to the airport to pay the tax, they said they got no money, but George Harrison will pay for it. So they rung up, they gave him a number, and George Harrison's, Apple had to pay for it. And George Harrison then copped out and sent a telegram to everybody that the Hells Angels are coming, look after them, but tell them I'm not around. So he disappeared. So they all appeared at Savile Row, and they literally took over. They were all on acid, they were all drinking nonstop. They all just literally piled in, and it was Christmas time. And I was told that they organized this great big Christmas turkey, which they had upstairs for a Christmas party, and John and Yoko were going to be there. And they were so out of it that they were sort of screaming, "Where's the food? Where's the food?" And a bit like Henry VIII's time on these great big, where they just take lumps of chicken or turkey out and start eating it and all coming down their mouth. This is supposedly what happened. John and Yoko came in and something happened and he hit John, the guy. That was witnessed by, I think that is in a book, which is a great book, The Longest Cocktail Party. if you want to read a great book on what actually happened, it's The Longest Cocktail Party, written by just forgotten his name at the moment, but he knew everything. He was the house hippie, and he wrote this amazing book, and he describes that particular scene. One of the scenes that happened to me was when the Hells Angels they had patchouli oil. They used to cover themselves in patchouli oil. So it was a very hippie thing, to put. It was like a hippie aftershave, a hippie perfume. And you can smell it. And once you've got it on your fingers or it clothes, it smells forever. When I was there were two Harley Davidsons outside, chained to outside Apple in Savile Row. I've done a hard day's work, as they say, and I then, because Chris O'Dell is working there, I then finish from my shop in the King's Road. I'm literally across the road. And as I'm walking up, I can see two Harley Davidsons chained to the post. And I lived on the ground floor. And I thought, oh my God, she's brought them back. Because I was on the ground floor, I could see all smoke coming out, right? I'm thinking, oh my God. It was like they were trying to, a new pope was going to be elected. There's so much smoke coming out. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to get busted here. This is it now. I walk in to my flat, and I'm nervous now. I walk in, and there's Ken Kesey, the guy that one flew over the cuckoo's nest. I'll tell you the other guy's name in a minute because it's quite funny. But he had long blonde hair down to there, and there was Frisco Pete, head of the Hells Angels chapter, and Pete, another guy there, and Chris all sitting there. I had cushions on the floor, and they got Budweisers there, and I'm thinking, he said, "Oh, Leslie," he said, "do you want a beer?" And I thought, "Oh, please don't bang it on my table. Beautiful table. Please don't knock the thing." So he opened it up, had a beer. I was very nervous. So I said, "Hi, Chris." He said, "Oh, Leslie, I brought them back." So I said, "Yes, yes, lovely. I see that. Lovely." And I said, "What have you been doing?" He said, "Oh," and then he turned around, the guy said, "Oh man," he said, we all taken acid. And I've just taken Chris around Knightsbridge on the back of her heart, this Harley, right? Around there, all been great. He said, "You've been on a motorbike before?" So I hate motorbikes. I'm scared, especially being a pit. He said, "Oh, come on, I'll take you out." I said, "No, another day." I've just come back from work. I'm very tired. I sit down, and I'm sitting there, and I don't know quite how to maneuver in my own flat because they've taken over. And all I did, I had the beer, and I sat down with this guy, Frisco Pete, and he just suddenly twisted and went, "You cut the Beatles' hair, don't you?" And I went, "Yes." And suddenly I was like God to him. "Oh, tell us all about it. You're a hero. You're this, you're that, you're that." Brilliant. Okay. So he gave me a card, an official card, when I got upstairs. They left in the morning. Did they leave in the morning? May have left early morning or late night. I can't quite remember. And the card, it says, it's a Hells Angels card. It says on the back, "When we do right, no one remembers. When we do wrong, no one forgets." And he gave it to me, and he said, "If you ever come to LA, just come, make you feel very welcome." I've still got the calling card here. There. That was scary. That was very scary.
That's crazy. That's a crazy story, that book. I think the craziest story in the book is how you could have been at Sharon Tate's house that night with the Manson murders.
That was the scariest. That was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Or is it Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Once Upon a Time in America with Brad Pitt and
Hollywood, yeah.
Yeah. So Sharon Tate, probably one of the best looking women I've ever seen. Right? She used to come in the salon. Vidal used to do her hair. Beautiful looking girl, married to Roman Polanski. So she was about 6'1", and Roman Polanski was about 5'1". Okay. But he was very friendly with Adele, and they were part of the whole scene. And so I used to know who she was, Sharon Tate. Okay, so I get a phone call from the salon, and a guy, the other end of the telephone, says to me, "Hi," he said, "my name's Jay Seberg. I've heard all about you, Leslie. We're on a similar wavelength there because I do Steve McQueen's hair, Warren Beatty's hair, I do the Beach Boys' hair, and I do Frank Sinatra's hair. And he's reading off all these names there, and he said, and I know you're the equivalents. You do the Bee Gees, you do the Beatles, you do this, that, and the other. I said, yeah. He said, well, I'm thinking of going into men's products, and I think it'd be nice because there wasn't really any men's products at the time, right? He said, I think it'd be. Would you be interested in sort of joining him? I think we'd do well together. And I thought, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea, isn't it? Why not? Especially going in with a guy like him, who had a great reputation as well. And he said, yeah. And he said, listen, he said, we're staying in LA, and why don't you come over and stay with us, and we can discuss it then. Now, I had some Beatle things to do besides at work, but there was something important with going on with the Beatles. I don't know what was going on, but there was enough for me to say, I can't do it straight away, but give me the end of the month, right? Let me call you, and then we'll talk about coming over and discussing it. Left it at that, just Jay Sebring could have said anything, right? I pick up the newspaper about a week later. It says, beautiful actress, 8 months pregnant, killed with her hairdresser, Jay Sebring, by the Charles Manson gang. Ripped apart with blood all over, pigs. And 2 other people who were staying there as well were also killed, right? And I took a shiver down me because I thought, oh my Christ, I could have been there. I could have taken that option up, and I could have been there. I went to see this film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah,
Went
yeah.
with my wife. And I know Brad Pitt was in it, and I've forgotten the name of the other guy.
Leonardo DiCaprio.
DiCaprio, right. There's a bit towards the end of the film where they are going back to their house because they're stuntmen, aren't they? So they go back to their house, and next door, so I'm just watching this film there. It's a really great film, actually. I really enjoyed the film. And there's Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring come out and say, oh, hi, this is Jay, and I'm Sharon, and da-da-da. And I went, oh my God. And a shiver went all the way through me. And then I suddenly thought, it could have been me. We could have, it wasn't, but it wasn't. Yeah, that was a scary story. That was a horrible story, but yeah, you never know, do you, what goes on?
No, crazy.
That? Jay Sebring, never heard it. I could have been another hairdresser there. They're weird. Anyway.
You were in the building when the Beatles were on the rooftop doing that gig, weren't you?
Yeah, that is in January. What was it? January 30th, 1969. Again, as I said, Chris used to ring me up, or somebody would say, "Come over. You wanted that? Just come over." And Chris just said to me, "Come over. There's something going on." I'm automatically thinking about whose hair I'm going to cut. I couldn't think of any other reason I'm going over. So I go over, take all my equipment with me again, get in the cab, get into the offices there, walk in, they know me. So I've gone right up to about 1, 2, 3, 4th floor. And there's a spiral staircase there, and there was amplifier wires all over the place, and there were little speakers and microphones and loads of things just going up there. And there was Mal Evans, big guy, Mal Evans. And I went, oh, hi, Mal. He was very busy. I went to go up the stairs. He said, no, you can't go up there. It's too busy. It's crowded up there. And there's a lot of work, a lot of things going on. I said, no, but Chris is up there. He said, no, you have to wait for her to come down. I did not know what was going on. Why would I think? What would you know? So I wait downstairs, above the roof. So you got the roof there, and I'm underneath. And must have been about half hour later. And next thing I heard was Jojo was a girl from Tucson, Arizona. Come blaring out. Where's all that coming from? And then they kept going on. You got Digger Pony comes on there, and I'm thinking, oh my God, they're doing a concert on the roof. So I looked out the window. So now I'm facing Savile Row. And if you think about it, there were no iPhones, no phones at the time. It was lunchtime-ish, cold day, and people are walking by. And they, when you hear music, the first thing you do is go, where's it coming from? Then you go, and you realise it's going on the roof. And suddenly, there's, Savile Row used to be two-way traffic. It's now pedestrian, well, not quite pedestrianised because it is one-way. It's one road from going one way, but the cars and the people were blocking the whole thing, which then in London moved on to Regent Street, which runs parallel with Jermyn Street. So that's being crowded. And it was quite amazing. This was this concert going on for publicity. Derek Taylor had, for the Get Back album, decided that he's very good at publicity. He thought they'd be good. They were going to go to other places. They were going to do a concert at the Roundhouse. They were going to go to Jordan. They were going to go to the pyramids. They were going to go to the Colosseum. They were going to go, and each Beatle objected to each one. One was traveling too much, can't be bothered. And I think it was George Harrison said, well, why don't we literally do it here on the roof? And everything. So when that was decided, Robert Lindsay Hogg, Michael Lindsay Hogg, the director, he had put, I certainly didn't know, but he'd put cameras all the way around the buildings, everywhere. So when you see the film Get Back, you see all these incredible shots that he had put these cameras, very clever actually. And that was it. The whole idea, Derek thought, would be, oh, okay, cause of the disturbance, 4 Beatles coming out with a policeman on handcuffs and coming out the front door all with handcuffs. Make a great picture, wouldn't it? That was a theory behind it there, but it never happened because the Beatles, the policeman was a Beatles fan. And he sort of, when he was up there, listened to a few songs and then said, Mr. McCartney, have you finished yet? And he went, no. They all put their arms out, to get arrested, and didn't. And they carried on, and they did 8 songs, I think. Repeated Dig a Pony a few times. And and then he said, look, you have to stop now. They've already done it now. They've done what they do, 43 minutes of it up there. And they did it. And at the end, John Lennon went over and said, well, we got to go. I hope we passed the audition. And that's how it ended. Yeah, so I was under the roof. Funniest thing is, you look on the rooftop itself, Chris is sitting next to, she's by the roof. She got Maureen Starkey, I think Yoko, someone else, and Chris. So she's sitting right up there with her. When I came back, I said, she said, where were you? I said, I couldn't get up there. I said, I didn't know this was going on. She said, no, I just went up there and just sat with Yoko up there. I said, fun, isn't it? They're all spontaneous things of being in the right place at the right time. You can't plan these things.
Well, yeah. There's a bit in the book where you mention the one and only time you ever took Paul McCartney's house for your cousin, but did you keep any other bits of memorabilia from your time with the Beatles?
Well, there was a couple of, there was one occasion that when Paul met Linda and married Linda, she seemed to, they was going through definite lawsuits between the other 3 Beatles. So Paul and Linda, and they had Linda had a little daughter called Heather. So Paul became a stepdad straight away. And she had got rid of loads of people around Paul who she probably felt wouldn't be advisable to have him around. Never, but for some reason or another, I got a phone call to say, would you go over and over to the McCartney's house? I said, oh, Paul's there. He said, no, Linda. I went, oh, okay. Go over and see her. And I go over there. Paul was there. He was doing other things. I cut Linda's hair. What kind of hair? I did her fringe, And then when I sat down, Paul was there, came back. And I haven't got it here. I've got it upstairs. Little Heather, while I was doing her hair, was sitting on the floor. And she drew in crayons. And she's put, this is a princess to Leslie, Heather McCartney. I still got that to this day there. only other occasion I haven't got it, but it's in my book. I did say to you before, so it's not quite 100% true. I never did ask Paul for his autograph, but I had my cousin who lived with us. Their father had left their mum and whatever. So my mum's sister, we had two houses. Well, they lived in one, the other, we lived in one big house. And she drove me mad to say, please, can you get Paul to sing? And I said, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I didn't even get it for my sister. I was mad situation was there, sitting down on the couch with Paul. The fireplace is there. He's there. I said, Paul, I have never asked you this before. And if you say no, I understand. I said, but I do have an insane cousin that just thinks you're God, right? And would you mind signing an autograph for her? Her name is Lynn, Lynne. And he picks up, said, okay. He picks up an album, right? Which is, forgotten, not Help, Revolver. Picks up the Revolver album. So he's got the Revolver album there. And he takes out the inner sleeve and he writes, to Lynn, best wishes, Paul McCartney, also known as Dave Clark. Dave Clark 5. Oh, also Dave Clark 5, Paul McCartney. And I looked at it and I said, oh, thank you. Why have you put Dave Clark? Now I know why. So because they backed the salon, and because obviously Paul's not madly interested in the money side of he used to say to me, who's come in? So he used to say, oh, Ringo popped in last week and Robin Gibb came in last week, and this one came in last week. And Dave Clark came in, and Lenny from the saxophonist, and Mike Smith came in. So all the Dave Clark, 1 week. So it was who came in? Dave Clark. Now, who was the only person that knocked the Beatles off the hit parade in America? Was played all over Dave Clark 5.
Yeah.
And they tried to push it that the Beatles had the Liverpool sound and Dave Clark 5 had the Tottenham sound, right? That's how it was in the papers. So Dave Clark, although they're not bothered by him, was like, if anyone's going to knock us off the hit parade, let it be Sam Cooke or Stevie Wonder. Don't let it be bloody Dave Clark from Tottenham, because so he put that there and he said, I said, why did you put that there? He said, well, you might as well have been Dave Clark's personal hairdresser instead of mine. He said, I could be Dave Clark as far as you're concerned. And I went, so I've got that. I've got it in the book. You'll see it.
Yeah.
And my cousin still got it to this day. And the funniest thing is, it's Paul's, I don't know how many albums he had of Revolver, but it's got on it, not for sale. And it was obviously a demo. And she's got it to this day. So that was two things that I definitely got. And the rest of it, I remember, is in my book, all up there.
Brilliant, yeah.
And my press cuttings. So that was important.
So my final question to finish off. So it's nearly 60 years ago since you started cutting hair for the Beatles. How do you look back at that whole swinging 60s time, though?
I thought it was a very, people say what era, I'd like to have been born in that era. It was an important era because there was a change. It was it was literally, people have said it before, the world was grey and it ended up being colourful. And then you had the culture changed. So you had the fashion, fashion changed, music changed, politics changed. There was Vietnam going on. The culture changed. When I started in 1962, you couldn't say you were gay. I was working with people who were gay. I didn't know that. And we talked about this last week. So I had to do a talk last week. When us guys would go in for the weekend, and we would sit and chat in our room downstairs before we did any work. It's in the staff room. Obviously, what's your normal questions? The guy, did you have a good weekend? Yeah, I met that girl and I met that girl. And then I would remember saying to this guy, how did you get on? He said, oh yeah, it was good. And I said, oh great, I didn't even know, I did not know he was gay. It wasn't until later on, well, it changed in August 1967, that it became legal. What torment that people, you can see it with Brian Epstein, but what torment of guys I was working with, and they couldn't say to you, oh, well, Leslie, actually, we're not interested in girls. So when you see that culture change, that was a very important part of growing up. So yeah, we didn't have the technology, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have phones. That's for later on, and that's also a great thing. But that particular era of the music and bands and listening to people writing their own songs, was incredible. This is Elvis Presley and people, they never wrote their own songs. Then you got Beatles come along there. They're in the same mode of, if you said to anybody, everyone would know who Mozart is, Beethoven, these great known names, Schubert, Mendelssohn, Lennon, McCartney. It all fits in together. And you ask someone in 100 years' time, everyone will know who Lennon and McCartney will be.
Yeah.
Jagger and Richard, very good. Doesn't roll off the tongue. You can ask someone, there are lots of people who wouldn't know Jagger or Richard, who they were, unless you know who they are. But everyone new enough knows who Lennon and McCartney are. And it's gone down as to be around that era. And for me to just be slightly, even a little bit associated with them, it's fantastic. I look back at it and I think, how did that come about? But, it wasn't anything bad. Yeah, so I'm very happy. I enjoyed every moment of it. I'm still
Yeah.
enjoying it.
Brilliant, brilliant. Yeah. Well, it's been an absolute honor to speak to you. As I mentioned, I've got your book here, which is a brilliant read.
Thank you.
I'll leave a link for the book in the description of the video.
Lovely. Thank you. You can get it at www.beatlesbookstore.
All right, brilliant, yeah.
So you've got the I'll send it to you. But yeah, if anybody wants to read it, I've got a million more stories in there. Very happy to answer any questions. And Ethan, behind the curtain, you're a very good compere. So well
Yeah,
done.
thank you for that. And thank you for your time as well. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you. Nice one. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
You too. Bye. Bye.
Bye bye, mate. Bye bye.